Hello, and welcome to Living a Culture of Life podcast by Human Life International. I'm your host, Colleen Haupt, and I'm joined today by Father Boquet, our president. Hello, Father.
Well, Colleen, good to be with you one more time.
Good to be with you, too. And today we're going to be talking a little bit about your recent article that dealt with clinics who perform gender transition procedures. You talked a little bit about those, and then maybe jump a little bit in the second half of this program towards how we can respond to people who are struggling with those issues.
Sure. Awesome. Look forward to it. Yeah. So the column this week, really just kind of focuses in on, what's happening out in our culture. And, none of our listeners would be unfamiliar with some of these issues, particularly with the issue of gender dysphoria. And what's happening to so many of our young people, our young adults today within this culture, such a permissive culture that really is falsifying the language of the human person in a sense of that, the reality that we're made male and female. And of course, with that comes, just saying that, would not be welcome in most conversations today, because the whole issue of gender dysphoria is those who are struggling with, identity. They're struggling with, an understanding of sexual identity. They're struggling with what it means to be male, what it means to be female, and so much confusing language out there, Colleen, and so much what they're hearing and seeing on TV, hearing on radio, what they're getting on social platforms like Facebook, TikTok, and so many places. Our young people are really so heavily influenced, and sadly they're being influenced by adults, with their own ideologies, their own ideological understanding, and wanting to impose these values. And so the article really hits some points that we're seeing in two different clinics. And one in Boston, and the other, that we're dealing with now in the UK that's been now closed since this article, even before the article was written. But because of the backlash, to this issue and the advancing of the issue of promoting this whole transition, in young people, young children particularly, and so we're going to talk. So the article gets into a lot more detail. So I just want to say that to those that are really interested, if you just go to the links, it'll bring you to much more detail about those two different situations, one in Boston and one in the UK.
And just before we jump into that, speaking of links, to any of our listeners who have ideas for podcasts for the future, we would love your feedback. So if you'd like to drop something in the comments of a topic you'd like covered, we'd really like to be able to make this podcast pertinent to questions that you have. So
very good, awesome, yeah. And look forward to it. And so in Boston, what we have here is, and the best way to tell the story is to go to the person, that on Twitter, kind of addresses the lie, that Boston Clinic was saying. So basically what happened was Boston Clinic was exposed for working with so-called treatments with young people. So this is young children, young adolescents, young adults, and particularly those under the age of 18. And the idea of going through, surgeries that will change their body structures, from medications that, alter, in the sense of growth and, from hair and, and just, the whole fertility issue that comes with all this. And it's so hard to discuss because it's uncomfortable when you start thinking about all that's happening in this. And so obviously what happened when that all came out, the Boston Clinic said, oh, no, we're being smeared. It's a smear campaign. We're not doing all that. But what the person does is, on this Twitter, just exposes the fact that these things are happening. And it goes through great detail to show what is happening inside this particular clinic in Boston. And please. And
I think you also mentioned that they said that this was a smear campaign, but then somebody pointed to the actual videos that were posted on their website. I'm not sure if they're still there. But.
Yeah, they might. Well, things get pulled. So I'm going to just kind of use my article just to kind of reference it. So the idea here is that it's the hospital's own videos. So this is what's important, So they're saying that this is a smear campaign, but it's their own videos. One of their staff explains that while the other hospitals might require a patient to be 18, quote, before performing any manipulating surgery. So here, cutting off a healthy limb, let's say, a gender-affirming mastectomy, this goes through. But Boston's hospital has done so in children as young as 15. And in the same video, the staff member explains that they do sometimes perform genital surgeries on 17-year-olds. So this is coming, from, this explanation, and it's just, it reawakens this conversation, Colleen, that, first of all, we're dealing with young people who in many ways are, when gender dysphoria, are confused. And so, but then they're being funneled. I mean, immediately when a child, may say something, give the impression that they're going through gender dysphoria, they're funneled directly down an alley, and everything now is aimed at helping them fulfill, in a sense of what they're maybe thinking, or to respond to their confusion by saying, "You're absolutely right. Let's go this way." And it's mutilating procedures, to their bodies. As I said, long-lasting medications that alter things for a lifetime in their lives, physically and mentally, and so. And no one's recommending just, how about we press a pause button? And what we really need is counseling, guidance. This confusion can find a resolution in a positive manner in most cases if we just allow the child to grow, to mature, and answer their questions and deal with the reality of their sex, and help them to appreciate the beauty of what it means to be boy, girl, male, female, and if we do that, then these things usually resolve themselves, as many of the studies will show.
Well, and that's such a confusing age. Like the age between you're 14 and when you're 18, when you're in high school, like anyone who's ever taught middle school or taught high school or remembers that age, it's full of many confusing things, and trying to just funnel children into something that will completely change their life based on them trying to figure out who they are as they become adults. That
what was happening, like in the Boston Clinic and many other facilities around our country and around our world, is that they're now just responding to this wave. So in a sense of, when you think about the textbooks, and we think back to the video platforms and the social platforms and what they're hearing in their schools, and what's being told to them by adults, or even sometimes very sadly by their own parents, so what you're talking about, if we just step back just 10 years ago, this would have been something that would have been handled very, very differently, and obviously step back even further than that, and you had a structure, that would have, stepped into a situation like this in an appropriate manner, and that is provide counseling and guidance and help a child to understand, these things are, in relation to who you are as a male, as a female, and what that means to be male and female. But again, just even me using this language with you, Colleen, in the secular world, I would be labeled as, obviously a hate monger. I wouldn't be respecting, people's own autonomy. But here, we're talking about children. Children, as you just said, who are themselves confused. They're easily impressioned by other things. Other people, and it can easily be swayed in many directions. But again, this is the moment, that requires a pause, a step looking at this. And I've discussed this in other podcasts before, when we've had husbands and fathers, and wives, mothers, trying to intervene, against maybe another spouse who is supporting this transition, so-called transition. And then the idea here is, and what happens, they're shut out, sometimes even denied parental rights. So we see the threat. So it's very frightening to step into this conversation as a parent, as a grandparent, a godparent, as a sibling, that loves their sibling or their friend, because you would be labeled, even to the point maybe as a parent being denied parental rights because you're threatening your child, you're harmful to your child. That's the reality that we're dealing with out there. And then what happens is the hospitals and the clinics, of course, they pick this up. And and they just want to be part of the process. But let's be honest, there's a lot of financial gain in this process too, and it feeds the narrative. And affirms the narrative. So this is what we're, in a sense, up against. And what happened in the UK is that, unlike here, in the UK, there was such a backlash when a story came out, and for this particular clinic. And what it showed, because the whistleblowers came out and identified that this particular clinic was heavily influenced by a pro-trans environment. And so as a result, anyone coming in, anyone that came in was immediately funneled down that path. No one pressed pause. No one said, hey, wait, let's take time with this. Let's look at all the situation. And anyone within the clinic who voiced any opposition to this was immediately either silenced or sometimes dismissed. And so the whistleblowers just exposed what was going on, just like the Twitter video does by showing Boston Clinic's own videos. Wait a minute here. And it caused a great backlash to the point where the clinic was shut down.
The clinic in the UK.
In the UK,
yeah.
Right. So I just wanted to point out two kind of different scenarios of what's happening with the hope that maybe what's happening in the UK will reverberate, and especially in the Western world, that may pause and look at this. Oh, wait a minute here. There's a precedent being set here, and I'm glad because it needs to have a resounding voice, around our world. This is not good.
Yes. No, that would be amazing. Yeah. And it's good to have that happen one time because then people can look to that and say, oh, this is what was going on here. Maybe a similar thing can happen in your own country.
Exactly.
And also if what was revealed about the clinic in the UK was shocking enough to shut that clinic down, maybe people will start questioning what happens in other clinics that perform similar procedures. And
so much is hidden, Colleen. It's especially with our young people. I mean, they're told, don't tell your parents. Don't mention this. That you're thinking this way because they're going to come in and they're going to want to convince you not to do this. And so, our young people are being heavily influenced by an ideology and by those promoting that ideology at all cost.
Well, and then you have social media that backs that up immediately. Like
Correct.
I've even seen that just Instagram has things that are like their For You page. Right. And it's things that based on the algorithm of things that you're interested in, they think you're interested in that. Right. And I've gotten things that were transgender and I'm like, I'm definitely not interested in this. And I follow Catholic web pages like, right. They're even for people that this kind of algorithm wouldn't affect, Instagram still tries to kick it up. And right. I can't imagine for people that have searched that or who have those inclinations, I'm sure it's even stronger.
And in very permissive culture that we live in, this is another example of, what's being advanced. Mm-hmm. And, because basically, as we talked about in a previous podcast, if the mindset and the framework of the dominant narrative is, if this is what you feel, then you should follow through with it. This is the permissive mindset. So basically, reality is pushed aside. The reality and nature of the human person is pushed aside, for a false understanding, as we see also with those who are detransitioning, mm-hmm. That really never, sadly, are not given the opportunity, to be on the platforms. They're silenced in many cases. But what you hear from those that are in that stage of trying, quote, detransition is, the long-term impacts, the medical difficulties, the all the issues that come with that life.
The mental health issues
exactly,
that come with it.
That they're talking about. And I'm glad that is getting out there, that they are finding platforms to be able to address it. And it's important that we see this and we hear this. And so these are the things that are going on. So there really is, you can see the battleground. They're very visible here, so just as we see it with the beginning of life issues, we see it at the end of life issues with or to euthanasia and so forth, assisted physician suicide. We can see it here, right in the heart, of this revolution, that we call, the result of relativism, this idea that, I can, it's my truth, it's, quote, my body, I can do what I want, I have free will, I can choose these things. And so this is it. Here we are, and I think it's important for us to realize what's at stake here, mm-hmm. and not only in the moment, but in the long term. What are the long-term impacts upon all these individuals who are funneled in such a direction, and also upon our society, Colleen?
And also throughout history, man has tried to play God in so many ways. I think that was like the Tower of Babel. They were trying to reach it, like make it, build it up to the heavens. And I feel like this is with our scientific advances, this is just another way that man's trying to do that. It's trying to jump in and say, oh, God created me the wrong gender. I need to change that. And right. really just showing that diabolical influence on the medical world. Well, not all the medical world, but certain aspects of medical.
And here we're talking about, a manipulation. It's also, some of the terminology is that it's a mutilation, of the body here that we're doing. And I remember a story, that I wish I can remember the person's name, because it's a story that's been out there. But this individual, wanted to go through this surgery, to literally go through this transition. And what's happened is that basically the body recognizes that this is not natural to that body, and it continually wants to heal this wound. So basically, this person wanted to transition to being female, and so had this particular surgery done to augment, the body, and the body just recognizes that this is not natural, to that particular body. It's a male body, and so basically the medications, the constant, things that have to be done, because the body wants to heal, quote unquote, the wound. And so, and I'm not being too graphic here. I'm being vague, but I'm hoping that people kind of catch on what I'm talking about. But this is an example so it's a lifetime, and to know that this person will have to endure so much for the rest of their life because this is what's occurred. And they knew that, and they actually talk about that they're still willing to do this. But, when you think about, the ramifications of that, and as you said, the health issues that are going to come forward as a consequence of that. And so as the church teaches, we believe in not only the respect for the body, but also the very fact, the integration of the body, the whole understanding of that I don't have a right, to mutilate my own body. You're right.
And whenever you're living in denial of truth, you're never going to be able to be satisfied either. It's only by accepting truth and accepting natural law exists for a reason, and eternal law exists for a reason. And if you're trying to deny that natural law of either a scientific biological standpoint or from a moral standpoint, which this does both, you're going to run into so many issues. And one of the, we had an article from the National Catholic Bioethics Center, and they were saying that sex reassigned individuals were about 5 times more likely to attempt suicide and 19 times more likely to die from suicide because of something like this. And just showing that people promote it thinking that it's going to help with some mental health issue. Right. But if you actually look at the statistics, it doesn't help with that in the long run.
Exactly.
So, and I'll link that article to the
That'd be good,
video.
Because it's got some great information in it. And again, it talks a little bit about, in that same article about bodily integrity and, and what is the church's understanding of, for example, the manipulation or the mutilation, I used it early, of the body. So, for example, people might try to compare, these issues, to a particular surgery that deals with a real health issue. Well, these are very different because we're not dealing, quote, now, depends what side of the aisle you're on, Colleen, because some would say it's a health issue. And really, we're not speaking of a health issue here. That gender dysphoria is something real.
It might be a mental health issue, which needs counseling, but not a physical health issue.
But to physically alter someone's body, to chemically alter their body, to alter, their very life, and this is not what the church, advances. This is not moral. And it's actually, there's an intrinsic evil involved in this. And so the NCBC, the National Catholic Bioethics Center, really gives a little summary of that. And I think it's very important for people to look at those principles, especially those that maybe have relatives that are considering this pathway, and especially those within our Christian faith. We really need to have a Christian view of who we are as men and women, as male, female, and what it means to recognize that we're spiritual beings with a soul that animates the body, and to understand what the church speaks about and has done so for centuries, does speak to this. And we need to hear that and be guided by those principles and guided by that moral teaching, so that we can, as we face these dilemmas of human life, and as we said, there is a way that this can be dealt with, in helping those that may suffer with gender dysphoria, how to address it in a proper moral way that has also that's going to really respect them as the person they are, and to accept the person they are, and then help them how to deal with the things that they're struggling with in a proper moral manner. And this is happening every day. All right. So we're not speaking of something that's out there that may be able to be done. No, it's happening every day in a positive way and helping so many people. And so I'm glad that that you brought up that article by the NCBC. I think it'll be very helpful to our audience.
Yeah, and can we just chat a little bit about how we can just practically things that we can do to help to a lot of people either know someone who has wanted to transition or knows someone who knows, like it's so permeating our culture at this point. Just maybe some practical things for our listeners of how we can either talk to them or how, like, I know pronouns is a big question these days of do you use the pronouns, do you not? I think the same article that we were just talking about was talking about just never using the pronouns. It was saying that it was just addressing, there's a little section in there talking about schools and how schools should be able to handle it. But I just know that I've had friends that have jobs and they're wondering, what do you do if you have someone come in who says they want to be used, like wants to be referred to by certain pronouns and they're probably not, or you can't tell. And I don't know, just
it's confusing. I mean, and ultimately what we're doing is how do we deal with this confusion? And the first thing, is not to cooperate with the confusion, is not to affirm the confusion. Obviously, Church very, very clearly, we respect all individuals. We never discriminate against any person, no matter where they are in their situation of life. We respect them, and that's the respect that's owed to every person, right? Because every person is made in the image and likeness of God. So it's good for us to, to always keep that in our mind, in our view. And at the same time, I'm not going to participate in a falsity. I'm not going to advance a falsification. I'm not going to encourage that false narrative. And so what's important is really for us as we deal with people who may be struggling with gender dysphoria or who may be, in a position where they want to use certain pronouns, they want to use certain names, is to really have the courage and the strength, to not participate in that. Now, I know, again, the article that NCBC is dealing with gets into a little more detail, of cooperation with evil. I'm not going to try that here because we won't have the time to really go into all the detail of it. But it's a good link, it's a good article, and it does talk about cooperation with evil, and remote cooperation, which is very good for people to really listen to, especially business owners in our Catholic community, especially, obviously, those who may be dealing with people that may be working for the church at this current moment. So how do we deal with that? So
Catholic schools and Catholic hospitals.
Exactly. So I mean, the idea here is is to recognize the person for who they are, to recognize that there is a truth about this person. There's a reality of that is clear, and we need to always not advance the false narrative. And at the same time, I'm not going to call a person that's a male a she, and so, but that's a challenge because immediately, in the public realm, you're thrown into a legal battle. And I think it's important. That's why I like this article that you're talking about, Colleen, because it'll help people even in the business realm. Because from a legal point, there are so many issues that they have to face, in the secular legal system, from a Catholic perspective, within the Catholic system, within the Catholic Church, within its schools, within its parishes, in its universities. We recognize that we can advance what we're talking about, more easily and more steadily because we hold these principles as Catholic as believers and as a Catholic faith, as a Catholic Church, and so we can address them and be able to do them. But I know that people who are in other arenas of work, other environments, you have to really look at, I would say the first thing is try not to participate in it. That's the first thing. Do not do it. But at the same time, you have to consider now, what are the legal ramifications if you're the business owner? What's going to happen to you from the secular point of view? So it's complicated. It really is. And because the narrative has so entrenched itself into our legal system, into even to the point of laws being passed, it makes it ever the more difficult. So, but I would say we're going to have courage. We have to have the ability to stand in that forum and to give witness to that truth. And we have to really pray for that grace and that understanding of mind and the fervor we need to do that. And sometimes we may have to remove ourselves, completely from that. Now, so I'm speaking in a wide range here, but I just think that if I know people, personally who are going through this difficulty, and so when I'm in their company, I address them for who I've always known them to be, and so I don't participate, in the narrative. And they have never really pushed back at me. They may be uncomfortable, they may not like it, but at the same time, I'm not going to advance that narrative.
I think it's a delicate balance that needs prudence. Like, this is definitely, all moral issues need prudence, but trying to walk that line of expressing love for them as a child of God, but not affirming them in the things that they're struggling with. I know, correct, just having heard stories of people, it's that either experiencing at the hands of Catholics rejection or people affirming what they're doing, and trying to walk that balance, correct, of helping them through this as a fellow child of, correct, God, created in the image and likeness of God, but also not affirming a lie.
And just being consistent, because if someone, was doing something that was harmful to themselves, we would not knowingly support that. We would intervene. And we have to see this in the same way, that there is a harm being done, a physical harm, a mental harm, and a spiritual harm that is occurring. But as you just said very beautifully, with patience, tenderness, always with compassion, but with truth. The conviction that the truth is what sets us free. And so to always approach from that perspective. And that allows the door to always remain open, to let them know they're loved, they're cared for, and always will be loved, and always cared for, and supported for the person that they are, not for this false narrative. It's like, I'm not going to abandon you because you go down this path. I'm not supporting this path, and I'm not going to support whatever lifestyle may come along with that. But I will love you. I will care for you. And so I think that's important, because we would see this in similar ways with other similar moral issues. A child that may be struggling, or a person that may be struggling with same-sex attraction. So how do we approach those kinds of moral issues? And so there's a lot of similarity here. If a person, wanted to, just physical harm, for example, in college, you might have a friend that drinks too much. What do? Give them more to drink? No, you don't. You intervene. A person who's struggling with any type of addiction, we don't feed the addiction. We intervene, and we let them know that we love you, we care. And so, but we're not going to support the narrative. We're not going to support the lifestyle. So there's a lot of similar, approach in this. This just makes it more difficult, because at least the world today wouldn't support, a drug addiction as a whole. People would not do this, but you want to intervene? Yeah, please.
Well, and also I feel like these people that are struggling with this see that as an attack on themselves. Usually if you have a friend who drinks a lot, they don't identify with the alcoholism, or if they do, they know that that's an issue and they're trying to work past it. But this, I think that one thing that makes this a particularly difficult struggle is personal. They see you're not affirming this as an attack on themselves, and then so trying to love them for their personhood and for who they are, but not affirming what they think they are.
And what you just said is the way I think is a perfect answer always, is just to reaffirm not what they believe they are, but to reaffirm who they are, and to help them to see that you are being respectful. And that this is, so the same arguments that we try to apply, in all the other moral issues that we've been talking about, or I just mentioned, can step into this moment too. And you're right, they do. It's a personal, very similar in a sense to the abortion argument. My body, I can do what I want with it. And we know that that's false when we're dealing with another false here. It's the idea that, so that's part of the reason. So we have to make sure that we ourselves are not buying into the narrative, and that though our sensitivity is sensitive to the care for that individual, we don't want our sensitivity to get, to weaken what we know to be the right and the good and the true here. And that's where the challenge lies, in us, is have compassion, but not false compassion. To be sympathetic, but don't have a false sympathy in a sense of condoning, of supporting that. Love the person, and recognize that this is not something good, and there's something sinful, and there's something morally wrong here.
And if you can, help them get the help that they need as well. I don't know if there's any resources for like psychologists who have a Catholic perspective. I'm sure there is somewhere.
Right.
But trying to help them find some help that won't just funnel them down that path towards a transition, like you were saying, often happens, and finding the actual, because usually there's some deeper root problem that's going on.
Exactly, and that's why it's important to, and a person may struggle. I mean, we see this, with those who may be struggling with same-sex attraction. It may be that they live a chaste life, in a pure life, but struggle, in their lifetime, this cross that they may carry as they deal with this issue in their lifetime. And this could be something similar to some people that may struggle, with this. But the beautiful thing that always is present is, as we know with the group Courage and others that are supporting those with same-sex attraction and those dealing with this, there's a support. There are people that are there to be of support and to walk the journey together, that a person is not alone. And many times people do. They feel alone and they feel pressured, into giving into a lifestyle or to a practice or into a behavior. And so that's why it's important to press that pause button with regard to gender dysphoria particularly, so that, and we help navigate, toward, the reality, but also to help them how to cope, how to deal, answer their questions. I find a lot of times, Colleen, it's the confusion is we got to, as we said before in our podcast and my articles especially, we're in a sex-saturated culture. And because of the pornography industry and because of so many other influences, it just confuses this whole thing ever the more. And we cannot deny the fact that many of our young people at very young ages are being introduced into sexual, conversation through soft porn on TV, on the movies, much more hard porn now today, and obviously the whole pornography industry itself. It's so readily available, on all these gadgets that kids today are playing with, even. And so they're being introduced to thought. They're being introduced to behavior. They're, as you said earlier, their bodies themselves maybe not even changing yet or going through that process of change in adolescence and moving toward adulthood. They may have more, some may feel that, they have, and I never liked this terminology, they may be more male, they may be more female in the sense of some attributes, they may have a deeper voice, all the things that you hear them talk about when you meet with them. Well, everyone tells me I'm feminine. Well, what does that mean? And so, but it happens is that, but they find themselves being pushed and funneled. And I think that, that's why it's important, for those who are working with adolescents, working with young children, and mentoring them and counseling them, themselves, not, be, and that was happening at a Tavistock UK clinic, is that the majority of the people involved were pro-transgender. So what happened is that no matter who came in, even with an inclination, just a thought, immediately we got a funnel. As I've shared in this podcast before, of some young children, maybe who, as little children, are found, little girls are playing with Tonka trucks, and little boys might have picked up their sister's doll. All of a sudden, wait a minute, you must be, and all of a sudden, parents are just feeding into this. And others, no. And so we need to do is I think as parents, grandparents, godparents, family, is first of all, never leap and just into these things, but also, help. We need to talk to our children. I have found so many young adolescents, especially adolescents, they have so many questions, but their parents don't talk to them about it. And so they're adults that should be able to have a conversation with them about what is happening to them physically, mentally, even spiritually. They don't find the answers. So they'll find answers other places. And they'll move into things that are not so healthy. So answer that question in a long way, Colleen, is for parents especially, talk to your children. Be observant of what your children are engaging in, what they're reading, what they're watching, and be observant enough to answer questions in a proportionate manner. I mean, obviously, we're not going to tell a 5-year-old all these details, but each parent knows their child, and we should never obviously lie to our children, and we should not even trying to protect them from a more language. But if they're asking questions, the parent has to realize how to find a way to answer that question. Mm-hmm. And if they do, and it's truthful, and the parent stays with it, then the child will trust the parent that this is the path. But a lot of times these kids are hearing other people. So mm-hmm. that's what I mean by being observant. So I think it's important, for us to be attentive as people who care, in this regard.
And I don't think parents always realize how young children hear these things from the culture. Like, they pick up on a lot. And I think, obviously, like you said, age appropriate, but also just realizing that it's so important to have those kind of conversations in a world where they're going to be hearing it in a different manner from so many other sources.
Exactly.
It's not like, oh, once you introduce it, then they know about it. They might be hearing about it from other sources
Exactly.
long before you talk about it. So being able to effectively
That's right.
gauge when that's necessary.
And also, just back to that little permissive culture, I mean, we just can't deny the fact that there is a heavy influence, where, it's if it feels good, follow it. If it's something you want, do it. This is the mindset. This is what's in control today in our secular culture. And so we just can't, as Catholics and Christians, who have a very strong Christian view and a Christian anthropology about what it means to be male and what it means to be female and what the dignity of life is and the respect that is owed to the human person and the very fact of the reality of what it means to be male and female. I mean, this is our narrative. This is what we hold, and to realize that there is a huge tsunami pushing against us. And we, as parents and those in Catholic education, those working within the Catholic institutions and structures, have to realize that this is the push. Mm-hmm. And we should never give way to it. That's why we should never participate, as you asked earlier, in the lie. Do not advance the lie. Do not encourage the lie. Don't participate in the falsification. And at the same time, that we shouldn't just take for granted that we've said enough. And I think that's what you said is very beautiful. There's never enough because of that wave. Because of the fact that our children and our young adolescents and our young adults are going to be constantly pushed, constantly, invited. And because that permissive culture has entered so much into the normative day of life, normative way of living, that it's sometimes not even noticeable. We don't even see it. And because we're seeing it on TV, we're seeing it in the movies, we're hearing it on radio, we're seeing it on the social platforms, it's desensitizing. Mm-hmm. And so, like I said, I would be labeled as a hate monger. I would be labeled as transphobia, phobia, whatever the terminology you want to call me. And according to their definition, that it probably fits in their mindset. But in reality, we're not. But this is the challenge, because that's the narrative, Colleen. That's the voice, and so we're outnumbered. But it doesn't mean we roll over. It doesn't mean we give up. No, all the more, we have to keep moving forward. We have to keep advancing the narrative, keep pushing against that tsunami. And we are, and that's what the Tavistock shows, that mm-hmm. if you really expose it and you show the horror of what they're doing, and to our young people and to young adults, that are lifetime changes. Mm-hmm. Those who have had their fertility, they've been sterilized permanently. They'll never be able to have children. These are lifetime changes. Body augmentations, all of it, Colleen. These are things that should never be lightly taken in the name of a permissive, culture. And that's what we're doing. I'm trying through the article is just to help our readers and HLI's audience and those that have a chance, and we pray that we'll share those, will make people just kind of ask questions. Mm-hmm. Go look at the material. I'm not making this up. And so look at it. This is real? And what does this say to us? So
Yeah, well, thank you, Father. Is there anything else you'd like to say before we wrap up for today? Or
what I would suggest in the column, I quote from the Catechism of the Church, and and as you mentioned, Colleen, going to the National Catholic Bioethics Center. So relying upon resources that can guide us in that mindset of that Christian viewpoint, that Christian anthropology, that helps us to know what does the church really teach about this. We didn't get into that today because that wasn't our intention today, but just to really talk about what's going on out there, what's being said, and what can we do in response. So we're given also, and I know that you mentioned that you're going to put this in the links and you're going to help people to see that. I would direct people there. What does the church teach? And I'm not going to read it, but it's on the final page of the article, and I'm quoting here, from the Catechism, number 365 and number 369, particularly, because to me it's the two components that really come to mind, and that is, when we talk about the unity of soul and body, so our understanding of the human person. And as you mentioned earlier, what we know from reality about the human person. And then the second part is, being man and woman being created, willed by God. And the understanding that, God, quote, doesn't make a mistake. And the understanding that, that there could be, because we're not speaking here, of some. I've heard one person one day talk about, it's like an abnormality, and I don't want to open up another conversation first, but it was false, because we're not talking here, of something that I may have been born with only 4 fingers, instead of 5. What we're talking about is the very nature of this person, that, is the reality of being male and of being female. And it's very, very different conversation. So I would encourage people, to read, to hear, and then take time to reflect on it. And then go to those places where there are valid resources to help explain it in more detail, as we talk about with our loved ones. So I wouldn't go talk to a loved one unarmed in this situation. I would not go to a loved one who may be struggling with this, and just say, I disagree with you. That's fine, but if they start asking questions and then you don't know how to respond to it, at least this way you can, by being of knowledge, you can come into those moments and bring some clarity. Even whether they accept it or not, you can know that you did what you could in that moment, and if given a chance, you'll come back and reinforce it. And every time you're given a chance, you come back and you reinforce it. It plants seeds, and it plants maybe a moment of pause in that person's life to say, Colleen had the courage to talk to me about this. And I know she's someone that cares about me. Let me think about this, and she may come back and ask, or that he or she may come back and ask you questions. And
I mean, it's one of those things too, where you want to be that person that if they ever, by some terrible thing, went through with something like that and then wanted to come back, they'd know that they could trust you and that you would be able to help them kind of pick up the pieces after something happens. Right. And just being, so that they know that you will hold to the truth, but also be a compassionate person. And like you said, not false compassion, but true compassion, which is rooted in truth.
That you would never mistreat them, and we never do that. And that's also the false narrative, that they try to label us, by. But that's completely false, because what you just said is exactly how the Christian responds to a brother and sister. They don't stop ever being a brother and sister, and even when they fall into things that we maybe completely disagree with, we never stop loving them, we never stop caring for them, we never stop wanting them, to return, to open their hearts and their minds. And so we keep trying, and we keep being present. And we also know, our own place. We know our boundaries about what we support the person, love the person, but we don't support the behavior, the lifestyle. Mm-hmm. And so, and many people I know, respect that in me. I've known family, friends, I've seen children grow up and sadly take different paths, but I never stop loving them. And if I'm in their family's home, I don't ignore them and go sit in a corner somewhere. That's not how we respond. But at the same time, I don't give any pretense that, I'm going to sit here and endorse, a behavior or a lifestyle. And so, and they respect that. They may not like it, but there's respect in it. And I've had many times many friends call and ask questions. What do I do? and even the person in a particular behavior will call, can I talk to you about something? Because that door is open. It remains open, and that's the way it should be.
Well, thank you, Father. And also to our listeners who are on YouTube or Rumble, please like and subscribe and comment if you have, like I said earlier in the podcast, any ideas for future podcasts that you would like, questions you'd like addressed or topics you'd like covered. And for everyone listening on our audio platforms, again, just if you could follow, share it with friends, and just keep listening to our content and keep on living the culture of life. God bless.